Hey folks, David Stewart here. It's time for some more Storycraft. That is the art of writing stories. Today it is 10 ways to make your protagonist likable. And these can function in any medium that you happen to be working in, whether it's comics or movies or good old-fashioned novels. A little bit of a background to this. I often get emails or questions on the channel or during the live chat of how to avoid making my character a Mary Sue. What flaws do I give my character to ensure that they aren't this power fantasy Mary Sue character? And the answer is, for most people, you're really not writing a Mary Sue because you're not actively engaged in some sort of author power fantasy that the story is a vehicle for. But it's important that whenever you are creating a character, particularly a main character that the viewer or the reader is going to be spending a lot of time with, that you make that character relatable and human. And so there's a bunch of ways that you can approach that. Before I get to those, let me talk about a couple of don'ts, especially when it comes to flaws. One of the things that you really want to avoid when you are making a protagonist is making that character really not just an anti-hero, but deficient or evil in some way. You want to avoid having your character be constantly involved in some sort of significant mortal sin. So if you have a protagonist and he's a serious philanderer, he's not going to be very likable. Now, he may be interesting. There's a difference between an interesting character like an anti-hero and a likable character. This content is focused on making your character likable. But even if you make your character significantly deficient on a moral level, you have to create a lot of interesting things about your story to make up for that deficiency. Or readers, viewers, they tend to want to disengage with it when they don't have anyone to root for. So you don't want to make your character like a violent sociopath. You don't want to make him like a rapist or somebody who's like advocating for genocide. There's some great books that I've talked about, like the Thomas Covenant series, that have very almost reprehensible characters. In fact, at the beginning of the Thomas Covenant series, because he thinks he's in a dream, he ends up raping one of the characters, which is a very heinous thing, and it's an action which ends up haunting him throughout, I guess, the rest of the books. But you have to have a lot of other things that make up for that, especially in that character. Thomas Covenant, it's an interesting case study. I wouldn't recommend most people try to write a character like him. So once we have this idea, like we need to humanize a character and we're going to avoid mortal sin, venial sins are generally something that's okay. So like if your character has trouble eating too much food, or he has a temper or something like that, these are things that people understand, they relate to, and they tend to forgive. And in some cases, they will actually make the character more likable. So I'd like to talk about those 10 different things which will make your character a lot more likable. So the first one is bravery, and I'm actually going to include two things in this first one: bravery and foolhardiness. Bravery being the virtue, foolhardiness being the flaw. So the virtue of bravery is you're willing to put yourself at risk. You're willing to do things which have the potential to turn out bad for you. This is something that we admire in people. It makes a character instantly likable, and we want them to be successful just because they're displaying bravery. Now, if you want to go a little bit further with it, then it can become a flaw that is also likewise kind of enjoyed by audiences, and that's foolhardiness. That's if the character is doing stupidly risky things. If the character is riding into battle all by himself on his horse alone with his giant sword, like this has been done in Berserk, then we tend to like the character that much more for displaying recklessness in it. He's excessively brave, and we really want him to come out of it, even though we know he's kind of stupid for taking those risks. Tend to like it, though. So foolhardiness is an easy flaw to give a character that will also put them in a lot of dangerous situations, which are great for story tension as well. Number 2 is, again, a two-part here, a virtue and a flaw. Wisdom or naivete. These are opposites in this case rather than a difference of degrees. So wisdom is a character that really knows a lot of stuff. When we see a character that has a lot of street smarts, we tend to like him. If we see a Harry Dresden that really knows what's up, we tend to want to identify with him. And this works really good if you are involved in a story that involves a lot of indirect exposition. The character knows a lot about the world and you don't yet as a reader. We tend to appreciate that character really is smart, really is wise, really has a lot of experience and know-how. Now, the opposite of that is naivete, being naive. And we actually appreciate being naive because it has a childlike quality. And because we want to protect children, we want them to succeed. This works really good for younger characters. We want that naive character to be protected. We want them to remain innocent in some cases, but we also want them to succeed and to grow up. That naivete provokes a lot of sympathy and empathy from people, so it works really well to get the audience on the side of the protagonist. The caution there, though, is that characters really have to grow out of being naive. So if they can start the characters fairly naive, like Luke Skywalker was fairly naive. If you watched the Alita movie, she's very naive at the beginning. And that naivete has to be a point that the character is going to grow out of. Otherwise, the audience will get annoyed with how childish the character is. They want to see them grow. So it's a really good way to start a growth arc, is to have the character be very naive, kind of out of their element, out of their depth. Trying to run with people who are more experienced and dangerous than they are. Really good for story tension. Then number 3 thing is not a set of ideals here, but really goals of the character, and that's the pursuit of justice. Because we admire justice, we are going to root for characters that are in the pursuit of justice, even if they do it in a way that's flawed. This is why superheroes are very appealing, is that their main cause for action is the pursuit of justice rather than something personal or vindictive, at least classic superheroes. So if their main goal is rooted in that pursuit of justice, we're going to want him to succeed, even if he makes mistakes on the way, or even if he does things that might be a little bit disagreeable. If he does something that's ruthless, like if you ever watched 24, you may have the main character really pushing up against the limits of what's acceptable to do, or even breaking them in order to get to that point where they can, save somebody. That is something that the audience not only is willing to accept, they even like them doing it. In some cases, it's enjoyable to watch a character step over the line and murder a bad guy in cold blood, because we want that bad guy who's a source of injustice to die so badly. And I'm thinking of the end of the second Stormlight Archive book, Words of Radiance, where Andolin finally kills this enemy of his father, really in cold blood. He murders him. But we hated that character for so long that the pursuit of justice is something that we accept, and we want him to do that. And even if there's negative consequences from it, we really don't want those negative consequences to fall down on that character, because he was doing it for the right reasons. Dang it. Number 4 is romanticism. So romanticism can actually be a virtue or a flaw, not just in degree, but I guess in the appropriateness of the situation. We like hopeless romantics. We like the idea of romantic love. Audiences tend to really enjoy characters having to be romantic with each other. Characters that are maybe a little bit resistant to romantic feelings, and then they become romantic. That's a great growth arc for things like romantic comedies, or anything that involves the B story as a primary romance, which is going to be a lot of other stories. We'd like to see them act romantically. Now, it can be a flaw if the character is too romantic or acts in a romantic way that is maybe slightly socially inappropriate. Then we have a provoking of sympathy and pity for him that also works to get us on the character's side. So, maybe you have a character and he brings flowers to a girl at high school, right? Like a couple high school characters. And it's very embarrassing. She doesn't know what to do with him, or she rejects him outright. And we feel a lot of pity for him in that embarrassing situation, but we don't fault him. We kind of say, I shouldn't have done that, but we end up liking him because he did something romantic, because he expressed his true feelings. We like people that wear their hearts on their sleeves. It's an attractive trait, even if it doesn't work out for the character. So it's a great way that you can have that be a flaw as well as a strength. The 5th one is victimhood. So victimhood is the state of having things done to you which you don't really deserve. So a prisoner is not a victim, but somebody wrongly imprisoned definitely is a victim. And wrongful imprisonment is an easy way to get the audience on the side of a protagonist and to fully be with that protagonist if they're doing even bad things. Like if that protagonist is doing bad things to escape from prison, we kind of approve of it. We feel good about him doing it, like Andy Dufresne helping people do their taxes, or Andy Dufresne framing the warden for various things before escaping. We appreciate that he did that because he's been a victim. He really went to jail for something that he didn't do. Now, children's authors like Roald Dahl have actually used this very extensively. sometimes in ways that I might consider inappropriate, but nevertheless, it's very effective, which is you have the main character is an orphan being raised by wicked aunts. Characters like Cinderella, raised by a wicked stepmother. Orphans, we feel bad for orphans. We want kids to have their parents and be loved, and when they're not, we feel an immediate sympathy for them, immediate pity for the kids, and that can turn into an empathy and a real identification with the character. J.K. Rowling does this and has used that very, very extensively. Having a child be a victim of abuse, or even if it's a woman and she's a victim of domestic abuse, we're immediately on her side. So making the character a victim can really work to make a character likable. Next one, number 6, disability. So disability is one that is not used very often, but it is one that makes a character likable, and it works in 2 different ways. First of all, you can have a little bit of a pity response for somebody who's disabled as a main character. That's whether it's a physical disability or if it's an intellectual disability. So Forrest Gump is intellectually disabled. So he's got a low IQ, or his mind is not working correctly, but he is morally good, and so we're really on his side. And the fact that he is intellectually disabled makes us like him more because we perceive him as being innocent. And so you see this in any kind of movie that features people who have intellectual disabilities. That perception of innocence is a point in the favor of the protagonist. We want things to work out for him because of that. If maybe the character has a brain injury or something like that makes the character more likable, we want them to succeed because of that significant thing that holds them back. At the same time, if a character is disabled, it's a real opportunity to show them being exceptional at something despite their disability. So if you think about in the game world, you have a character like Joker from the Mass Effect series. He's got this brittle bone disease, basically the same disease as Samuel L. Jackson's character in Unbreakable. And it is a severe disability for him, but he's very impressive with his ability to pilot a ship. And there's even a point in the second game where he has to act. He has to be the person who acts in the ship, even though he can't really walk, and he has to kind of limp through the hallways. And it's a very effective way to make a character likable. Even though he's very arrogant and has flaws in other directions, the fact that he's disabled immediately lets us connect with him and be impressed by what he can do. You could go with Professor X as an example of a character. He's restricted to a wheelchair, but he has other great powers, and because of that ability to be a good personality and a great leader, he's very, very appreciated, even though he has this severe limitation on what he can do physically. Number 7 is beauty or plainness. So again, I'm pairing up 2 things that are kind of opposites of each other rather than degrees of severity. So beauty, people like attractive characters. If you make your character beautiful, then that character is going to be very, very likable instantly. And this works really good in games and in any kind of visual medium, comics, games, movies. You can do this in literature as well, but you kind of have to describe a beautiful character and describe it in a way that the reader is really going to imagine somebody that's beautiful. You're still going to appreciate their beauty, but it's not as strong as it is in visual medium. If you have a handsome or beautiful character, immediately people like them. And the opposite of that is not ugliness, because ugliness might provoke a pity response, but it's not going to make the character likable on its own. But plainness, that is something that's just short of beauty, makes the character likable. So if you imagine you have a high school drama kind of movie, and you have the main character's kind of plain. She wears glasses. She has her hair kind of always up in a ponytail. She doesn't wear makeup. And then she has a big makeover before the dance, and they have the reveal, and whoa, she looks beautiful. She takes off her baggy clothes, and you see that she has a great body. This conversion from something that's not ugly but plain into beauty is something that's I guess very, very attractive to the audience. At the same time, if you just have a character who's kind of plain looking, or you say that they're plain looking, the audience identifies with that because very few people just feel incredibly attractive, even if they are. We're very insecure with our physical appearance, most of us, and so it makes sense if the character's kind of plain, we have a way to identify with them. A lot of girls in particular may be very, very pretty, but feel very plain. And so if you present a character as sort of plain, then they're going to think, oh, this character's a lot like me. And so it sets up a lot of great stories in that regard. Number 8 is ruthlessness or a forgiving nature. And again, these are kind of opposites of each other. Can we appreciate ruthlessness? Yes, we can, depending on context. Again, if you have that pursuit of justice and you combine it with ruthlessness, it makes a very effective character, a character that would just feels real manly and very masculine if it's a male character, or a character that we feel is very driven if it's a female character. So you think of like the bride in the Kill Bill movies. She's very ruthless. She's very relentless. We kind of get on her side watching her be so brutal against her enemies. At the same time, there's an opposite to that, which is a forgiving nature. If we see a character forgive others for the wrongs that they do them, we just instantly like him. It's maybe it's a Christ-like trait, maybe it's just a trait that we wish we had more in ourselves. But when we see a character that's capable of forgiving his subordinates when they mess up, or is forgiving of people who wrong him, then we immediately think of that person as having strong moral qualities, and it works really well. So it's just a really good idea to give your character one of these more extreme things. If the character is rather ruthless, I think that works for a more masculine character, and a forgiving nature makes the character more lovable in a way, and can make him feel like, make the audience feel like that's going to be a really good moral kind of choice for maybe a romantic interest somewhere in the story. Number 9 is going to be charm, which is strength, and awkwardness, which is a flaw. These are opposites of each other. So charm would be, kind of a ladies' man, James Bond, or Indiana Jones or Han Solo. These are characters that just have an attractive quality to them. They're able to talk to women. They're not awkward around the opposite sex in any way. Of course, there's charming females as well, but charm works differently for men and women. So a lot of Bond girls have a real charm to them. They're very attractive. They seem very confident in themselves. They're very able to use sexuality to their advantage. That's charm. A charming character is going to be one that the audience likes because they're charmed by the character themselves. Awkwardness, however, is a flaw that works really well to make the audience empathize with the character, because most of us feel a little bit awkward sometimes. So if the character is a little bit socially awkward, they don't really know how to talk to girls, then we feel like, yeah, I felt that way before, and we empathize with the character and we start to identify with the character. It's also a great point for growth again. The character starts awkward with girls and grows out of that awkwardness in order to be confident in himself. And I would say generally, though, be careful with awkwardness. You want to avoid having protagonists, I think, that are real Omega type characters that like nobody likes, that are total lone wolves. They tend to feel a little bit creepy. Now you can do that, but again, it's not going to be a likable character. You're not going to have a great way of making total social outcasts be likable. You can make them feel like total social outcasts, but you want to have them at least get into the social mix and learn to grow that way. Number 10 is caring for others, which is a virtue. This is different from forgiving. Forgiving is forgiving people who wrong you. Caring for others is just people who generally go out of their way to do nice things for other people. If you meet a character and they're a caretaker for their sick relative, then they're caring, and you're going to get on their side immediately. This is the kind of trait that, if you remember me talking about Save the Cat, or if you've ever read Save the Cat, which is a screenwriting manual, this is an old trick that a lot of screenwriters will use, not just screenwriters, but novelists. They'll have the character save a cat, like get a cat out of a tree, run into the street and save a child. The audience immediately likes him. They immediately know that he's the good guy. They immediately want him to succeed because he did something good for other people. He did something caring for other individuals. It's very easy way to exploit the emotions of people. This is not something that you generally have to avoid, but I would recommend you avoid actually doing a save the cat moment. They're very obvious and tend to be a little bit awkward, but you can show caring in some other ways. Like I said, if they're a caretaker for somebody who's sick, if they really show concern for a character who's maybe like a little bit of a social outcast, that we really like that character. We want them to succeed. The opposite of this is really like a kick the dog kind of thing. They have no care for other people. This is a way that you can manipulate people into hating a villain. The character literally kicks a dog. He does something bad to another person with no regard to them and no real reason to do it. And that's an easy way to get someone on their bad side. And one of the things you have to think about with caring for others as a virtue state is that For instance, Superman, his fail state is not dying, but failing to save others. So it's a primary characteristic for, for example, superheroes. Their danger is in not being able to protect and care for others. That's, again, why superheroes tend to be very, very likable. So let me talk about a couple of examples before I end this rather long lecture. So first one is Harry Potter. How did Harry Potter become likable? Well, he's an orphan. He has a moderate amount of naiveness to him, naivete, especially once he goes to Hogwarts and he doesn't know anything about how magic works. He's a fish out of water. That's very interesting and likable. He's an abused child. His aunts and uncle, really, they stick him under the cupboard. He's generally just an abused kid as well as being an orphan, so he's a great victim. He's a foolhardy character. He jumps into danger without really thinking, and we appreciate that, even though his friends remind him that he's being stupid very often when he does it. He's very foolhardy. It costs him a lot. And so when he gets in trouble, like maybe he gets detention for just speaking out, and Dolores Umbridge makes him write those lines, and we hate her that much more, and we like him that much more for enduring that pain as a result of his foolhardiness. And he's a little bit socially awkward. He doesn't know how to talk to girls, really. But of course, Harry Potter has a really strong sense of justice. He knows what right and wrong is, and that is one of the things that makes him a very likable protagonist. He's also not powerful, so people talk about him being a Mary Sue. He's not good at magic. He can fly a broom pretty well, and that's his only kind of innate skill, his only skill that he's a natural at. Otherwise, he's pretty weak at all of his magic, and only becomes good at magic through effort and practice. It's really Hermione who's the magic expert, and Ron's kind of the best friend, sidekick kind of guy. Bella Swan is another one, so another young adult kind of character. Bella Swan is a character who's a plain girl who's also beautiful. So the way the author introduces her, it's her talking in first person about herself. She considers herself plain, but she's beautiful because she's actually describing traits which are beautiful, which is very fair skin and dark hair. And of course, the very, very attractive male character is attracted to her and thinks she's beautiful and charming. So there's a little bit of that fantasy involved there of the plain girl becoming beautiful. She doesn't do anything to become beautiful, but the plain girl realizing she's actually beautiful and she's not really so plain. She's a little bit awkward, but she also makes friends. So she's charming on one side and she's awkward on the other. Sometimes moment to moment, those traits can change. It's not super consistent, but it is effective and is probably appropriate for the audience that's being targeted with the Twilight books. She's very romantic. She has romantic feelings. She does romantic gestures. She's also very caring for others. She takes care of her father. She cooks him meals. She views herself as a caretaker for her father, kind of in almost a housewife-like position. All of that stuff makes her very, very likable. Another one is Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones is the quintessential likable male character, masculine character. He is brave. He is attractive. He is charming. He is wise. He knows a lot about archaeology. He knows a lot about the way the world works. And he has a strong sense of justice. He's trying to recover these historic artifacts so that they can be displayed in a museum and understood. He's on a quest for learning. He has a good, morally upright reason to do the things he does. And he's also quite, he's also can be ruthless at times, which we tend to like in a male character. So he's a great male character. And very good example of all the things lining up to make a likable masculine character. So even when he makes mistakes or he gets fooled, we don't mind it because he does it for reasons that we tend to like. He's doing it for a good cause. Elric is a really good anti-hero to look at. I think he's a likable anti-hero. This is going to sound weird, but he's physically disabled. He has this deficient blood that requires him to take medicine all the time. That's another great way for him to always be in a state of danger, is that his medicine runs out and he has to use his Blackblade Stormbringer to kill some people, and it will feed the power of the souls into Elric so he can overcome his deficient blood. He's ruthless at certain points. There's a point like in Fortress of the Pearl where he murders this entire town of all these nobles, kills them all. And other times he's very forgiving. He forgives people who wrong him in various different ways. He's really obsessed with human morality and wants to be a moral character. He's a character full of conflicts, and we want to see him redeemed. We want to see him saved. And we end up liking Elric through all of the bad things that he does as well as the good things that he does. He's a great example of a character that can be likable despite having significant flaws that would usually make most characters not very likable. And then I'm going to pull another one out of the Marvel hat, out of the superhero hat, Spider-Man. Spider-Man's a great example of a very likable character. He's likable because when we meet him, he's kind of a social, he's not a total social outcast. It's not like the kids think he's like a bizarre nobody, but the girls don't really want to go out with him. His friends don't really pay him a lot of time. They call him a bookworm because he spends his time studying science instead of going and hanging out with the kids. A little bit of a loser. He's a little bit of a social loser. He's also an orphan, being raised by his aunt and uncle. And he doesn't really lack courage, especially when he puts on the spider suit. He's always acting brave. And the audience really feels for him when he suffers a personal tragedy due to one of his mistakes of hubris. And I've done a piece of content in the past, how Spider-Man is a tragedy in 5 acts, the very first issue of it. So we really end up liking him because he suffered negative consequences for something bad that he did. We have all of that likableness still holding over when we get there. And of course, what's his quest? His quest is for justice. And he also becomes a bit more charming and learns to talk to girls as he grows through all the various issues, which is good to see as well. He becomes a bit of a hopeless romantic in some ways. So that's all there is. That's 10 different ways in depth to how to make your characters really, really likable. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I do write books. Here's 2 of the latest of them. City of Silver, Eyes in the Walls. Both of these are 99 cents. This one has a great little twist ending. And this one is what I call 310 to Yuma, but fantasy. So check them out on Amazon or at dvspress.com. Make sure you're on my mailing list, dvspress.com/list. And I'll see you guys next time.